Greetings, people of Earth. It's 11:02 on the East Coast of the United States, 8:02 on the West Coast, and 10:02 p.m. in Northeast Minneapolis, where I'm sitting. I'm Jim Peters, and welcome to another edition of Jim Peters at Night. This is episode 15. No, I'm sorry, 16. I'm having trouble counting. And we were back from a 1-week vacation. It took a little time to get our shit together. Figure out a whole bunch of stuff here that, little bugs in the system, all that sort of stuff. It's the reason I wanted to start before Labor Day. So we had a whole month of shows, which turned out to be 15 of them. I think actually if I missed two, one scheduled miss and one because we couldn't get a camera to work. And we would have been 17 shows otherwise. And we spent that vacation kind of getting our crap together. We did that. So I hope you had a good vacation. The weather here in Minneapolis, as usual, is nuts. It's nuts. I shouldn't. A friend of mine said, you shouldn't bitch because in 4 months you're not going to be able to leave the house. And that's true. But we set a record yesterday here. It was 99 degrees. It was 98 the day before. And the real amazing thing, I explained this on a show last month too. We're known here in Minneapolis for having really cold, bad winter weather. But what you don't know is we have pretty hot summers. And not only that, because of something called continental climate, and this happens here in this city more than any other place in the world. We have this really weird thing in the summer. It does not cool down at night. Like, for example, right now, like I said, it's a little after 10 o'clock p.m. The sun's been down for at least an hour. It's 82 degrees here. I just checked my phone just before we went on. And that it will probably last night, the low was 77, the low. And it's really odd. If you go out at night, you can go out at 3 o'clock in the morning. I've done this many times because I find this kind of fascinating. And I go for a drive, and it's basically just like it's daylight, except the sun isn't out. I mean, I can't. It's a really weird thing. You probably know if you even go to like the Death Valley or Southern California or places that are extremely hot. Even there, it cools down quite a lot at night. I mean, Death Valley can be 130 degrees in the day, and it can be 40 or 50 degrees at night. That happens. Here, no, we don't have the luxury of that. It's hot all the fucking time, and then for 4 months of the year, it's cold all the fucking time. Jesus Christ. Any rate, so what do we got going today? Our guest tonight is Chris Williamson, and Chris is the host of the Vanished podcast, which is a podcast that deals with the mysteries of missing people. And, this shit fascinates me. I love whodunits. It's really weird. I don't know about you. I'm starting as I get older, and most of you, no one's as old as I am. It's really funny. David Strom was on last Monday. He was our last show before the break. And he says to me, we're on the air. And I said, I'm bitching about being this old. And he says, hey, I'm older than you. I'm 57. No. No, David. Thanks for the compliment. I'm 67. I'm going to be 68 in a few weeks. So why did I bring that up? I brought that up because, as the older I get, basically the less I hate movies, the less I like movies, especially dramas. I'm not really into it. I'm not anymore. I love the comedies. Ha, 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 ha. I love that. The dramas, I don't know. I've seen enough, But the one thing I never get really tired of is the whodunits. I've been watching the show. It was on PBS. I've been watching on demand from Germany, and it's with American subtitles. It's called Luna and Sophie. And it's one of their series. They have a show over there that started, and it's called Soko Munich. And Soko is an anagram for Special Commission on Investigation in German or something like that. This show has been running 42 years. I mean, it's basically like their CSI or Law and Order. And there've been, I think, 11 spinoffs of the show. It's been running forever. Well, the show that we watch here in the United States called Luna and Sophie is actually Soko Potsdam. That's Potsdam, Germany. It's a town right outside of Berlin. A medium-sized city, a few 100,000 people. I mean, not a metropolis, but it's not small. And so my wife and I, we've been enjoying this a lot, and it's kind of a combination of whodunit. And I have to say, I saw the Girl with the Dragon Tattoo movies years ago, the original Swedish ones, all three of them, and then there was the American one based on with Daniel Craig, based on the original book. And first of all, I have to say, I thought the Americans were going to completely fuck this up. They didn't. Other than the fact that it's really weird if you watch this movie, the title sequence at the very beginning doesn't match the movie at all. It looks like it's from a James Bond thriller. I mean, I'm sitting and watching this, I thought, oh shit, they're gonna fuck this up. And the movie is actually quite good. But the thing I like about the foreign films and the foreign television shows is there's basically complete lack of glamour. They seem way more realistic and real to life. And this show's like this too. It's about two women, childhood friends, who joined the police academy together. Both of them became um, investigators, detectives, and they're lifelong friends, but they're not really very much alike. One of them is a bisexual woman who's basically kind of eccentric, quirky, and maybe a little messed up. And the other one is a married woman who's kind of maybe too stayed or something like that. I don't know. It was, but the thing is, but the chemistry is really good. Don't know the actresses; they're German. Don't know the cast; they're all German. The one guy, the guy who plays the commissioner, he was also in the Swedish Girl, uh, Girl in the Dragon Tattoo movie. I can't remember his name, Michael something something. But at any rate, why do I bring that up? Oh, because Chris Williamson is going to be on. So here's what we're going to talk about tonight. He's talking to me on the phone, and he's saying, "Well, what do you want to talk about?" And I said, "Well, what do you want to talk about? What have you done?" And he said, "Well, I've written a couple books on Amelia Earhart and DB Cooper." And I thought that, oh, we got an aeronautics theme. There we go. And so we're going to talk about the disappearance of Amelia Earhart, and I think it's in 1934 to 36. He'll fill us in, and the disappearance, if you want to call it that, of DB Cooper, who jumped out of the back of an airplane the day before Thanksgiving, 1971, between Portland and Seattle, or Reno and Portland, I think it is. Yeah. And so, yeah, neither one of these things have been figured out. There's been rumors for years about what that Amelia Earhart. We'll talk about it in a minute when Chris comes on. The deal is she was going around the world. She's flying west to east around the globe. She was supposed to be the first person to ever circumvent the planet, not just the first woman, the first person. And this is the cool thing about Amelia Earhart. She just didn't set any records for being a female pilot. She set records for flying. Period. And this was going to be one of them. And she had to make one more stop to refuel across the Pacific Ocean. She's going to make it all the way. And the spot they chose was a tiny, tiny little speck of an island called Howland Island. And Howland Island wasn't much more than an airstrip. That's pretty much what it is. But she had, and she even had the U.S. Coast Guard following her, and she was prepared to land there. Well, she never showed up, and they tracked her on the radio and stuff. She said she was having a hard time finding it, and it's always been assumed that she crashed. But a lot of people think no, she didn't crash. She landed on another island, and there's a lot of indigenous tribes in that area, and she might have been eaten. So it's just to get straight right to the point. Now, DB Cooper, they've never found either. The thing about DB Cooper is that, at one point, the FBI had 1,000 people who matched the profile of this guy, this DB Cooper guy who jumped out of the back of this airplane. And there's at least 14, if not more, very strong contenders, people who basically match this profile perfectly, and also even had a motive to do it. So at least 14 people. So we're going to talk to him about that too. I'm really looking forward to this. It's going to be really fascinating. On Thursday, joining us on Thursday is going to be Dr. Patrick Moore. I've been talking this up. Climatologist, the former founder or co-founder of Greenpeace, and he'll explain it to us when he comes on. I interviewed him about a year ago on a radio show. He quit Greenpeace for two reasons. First of all, he said it was just becoming another nonprofit money grabbing organization. He said it was started to exist solely to make money and for nothing else. And two, he's a trained professional climatologist, and he looked at the climate change issue, and he decided, as I have too, but it's nice to hear from him because he knows way more of that, that's complete and utter bullshit. There's more and more climatologists coming out saying this. And the reason is, and I need to be really specific here. And that's the thing. I'm going to get to this another thing about talking about being specific. People throw shit around. I don't want to throw shit around. It's not that climate change doesn't exist. It does. Well, actually, technically, it's not climate change. It's what's called a weather cycle. Weather cycles can last 30,000 years. They last that long. But for lack of a better term, we'll say it is climate change and it's real. That's not really the problem. The problem is what are the ramifications for humanity of climate change? And the answer is almost nothing. That's the problem. Nothing's going to go wrong here, folks. Nothing. Well, I mean, a few things. People say, "Oh, Battery Park in New York City might be underwater." All right, two things about that. In the last 10,000 years, the levels of the sea levels across the world have risen 450 feet. That's feet, not inches. 450 feet. So yeah, Battery Park may be underwater. That's true. Yeah, I want to point out that in Venice, Venice has been underwater for 800 years. They turned it into a tourist attraction. So, like the world is going to end. Not only that, there's a lot of climatologists who are saying, and historically, this was always held true, that it's actually a net positive for the world to warm up. The real problem, what we really want to avoid, is the world cooling down. That's the real problem, because then you end up with ice age. Even if you don't end up with an ice age, you end up with crops not being able to grow in a whole bunch of places. Now, if the world heats up a couple degrees Celsius, you, you, Phoenix might be completely uninhabitable, but they might be growing crops all of a sudden in northern Manitoba. That's the thing. So it depends on how you spread this stuff out. And yeah, so at any rate, we're going to talk about this. He makes a very, very compelling case. He has a book out that's called, oh, Jesus Christ. It has a weird title, and I can't remember it off the top of my head. But we will link to it after our discussion with him on Thursday. And the book's only about 150 pages long, and he completely shreds this topic. I mean, it's a little scientifically dense. You got to read it, but it's worth the trouble. All right, so I told you I want to talk about people, not getting things clear. David Strom was on a show last Monday, as I was saying, and the thing I was telling him, and he agreed with me, and that is I can sit here and bitch about Democrats, and I even sit here and bitch about Republicans. As speaking of which, what the hell is with Mitch McConnell? I mean, okay, he gave a speech today in the Senate, and I watched it, basically just to prove that he could still talk. And here's the amazing thing. He wasn't talking very well. I mean, he wasn't. He was kind of slurring his words a little bit. It's like, no. Hey, Mitch, look, I mean, I know that, the Republicans they don't want to lose a single person. Yeah, I got that, all that sort of shit. It's time to get off the stage. You and Dianne Feinstein, yeah, and Joe Biden too. It's the geriatric society. What the hell is going on here? These people are not well. They are not up to doing this. And I'm a Trump supporter, but still, I still wonder if Trump wins the election, he will be 77 on Inauguration Day. Now he's obviously, well, a lot of people say he's crazy, but the thing is, if he's crazy, he's genius crazy. He is obviously has his faculties at this point, but who's to say that's not going to go to hell in a year and a half? I mean, this happens to people around this age. People on both sides of my family live forever. My mother's 99. She's still living on her own. She lives in an apartment. She does not live in a nursing home. Um, she has a light amount of government assistance. That's it. She's fine. She walks to the market every day. She's okay. Her mother lived to be 104, was healthy until 2 weeks before she passed away. My grandparents lived, other than one that died at 77. The other three lived to be 99, 98, and 101. So, but the thing is, now I think I'm going to turn in about 6 weeks. I'm going to turn 68. I figure I only have, if I'm lucky, 15 good years left. I mean, maybe I have more. Maybe I'll match my mother. Maybe I will. I've never been a smoker, so that I got that going for me. I've been reading a lot of biographies lately, and especially a lot of biographical profiles on Wikipedia and stuff. It's astonishing how much smoking kills people. My father-in-law died from emphysema completely from smoking, and I swear to God, if and that was in 2009, if he hadn't smoked his life, I think he'd still be with us. I think he'd still be out mowing the lawn. Now I gotta figure out why I brought that up too. Uh, I brought that up because I want okay, so I wanna, I'm talking to David Strom and what we said is and I was going all right, and let me back up. I was gonna say that, I can talk about Democrats, I can talk about Republicans, I can talk about how weird everybody is, but when it comes right down to it, the thing that pisses me off the most is the mainstream media in the United States. I'm gonna give you 2 examples here and to be fair, one is a liberal skewing and the other is conservative skewing. It's not just that the Democrats do this, folks. Like the Republicans do it too, and it's equally evil. Two examples of this happening in the press, literally in the last few days. So the first one is I'm going to read you a headline off of the CNN website. This is the headline exactly. Quote, two Ugandan men face the death penalty after aggravated homosexuality charge. Now, the article is about the fact that in Uganda, homosexuality is punishable by death. They are. So if you read this article, you would get the impression that these two men were ostensibly lovers and got caught and that they're both going to be put to death. That's not true. What actually happened here, these two guys, they don't know each other. They were both arrested on completely separate crimes. Well, one was a child rape and the other was adult assault. So, they were both sexually related crimes, but they had nothing to do with this. The crimes themselves had nothing to do with homosexuality. And more importantly, these guys don't know each other. But if you read the article is slanted as that headline is, the article is slanted to to create the implication that these guys are going to get thrown in jail or possibly killed, receive the death penalty because they were lovers. They didn't even know each other. Now Strawn wrote an article about this that ran after our interview last Monday. It ran later in the week on hotair.com. And I think we linked to it if I'm right. If we aren't, I'm going to link to it tonight. I'll put a link up on our blog at jimandnight.com. This is intrinsically dishonest. I mean, but the thing is, I use this as an example because this happens constantly. Now, let me give you the example of the conservative side of this happening. So this story was in several places, and the headline was similar everywhere. The headline was, here's one example. Judge rules against University of Wyoming sorority and says it must admit transgender woman. Now, if you read the headline and read some of the stories, you would get the impression that the judge ruled against the sorority. That the sorority wanted to keep this transgender woman, this guy, and he's a dude. I mean, Jesus, he's 6'1", he's 260 pounds, and he's a dork. And the women in the sorority are complaining about the fact that they say he gets visibly aroused watching them. I mean, it's really this is a real stalking type edition type thing, but you get the impression from the articles that the sororities asked the judge to remove this person and the judge refused. That's not what happened. The judge ruled because he said the sorority is a private organization. They voted this guy in. They did. They took a vote. The local chapter took a vote. That vote was sent off to the national fraternity sorority organization where it was approved. And because of that, that guy's in the sorority. That guy, I'll call him a guy because I mean, as far as I can tell, and most other people, he's punking them. That seems to be what's going on here. But they let him in. And the judge ruled that he has no business telling a private organization what to do. If they don't want him in the sorority, they should vote him out. And they should. And I totally agree. The judge has no business telling a private organization what they can and can't do. I mean, this is but if you read this article in several different places, there's more than one example of this. You will get the impression that the judge refused to remove the guy. No, that's not what the judge is saying. He said you had the ability to remove him, and you're not doing it. And I'm granting you the ability to do that, so it's up to you. You know. So, any rate, this unnerves me to no end. That we are the mainstream media is completely off the rails, and there's virtually no honest press in America anymore. And I know that a lot of people watching this for the first time might think I'm exaggerating. I'm not. I've been doing this now for 3 years. I've been involved with another conservative news organization. I have seen so much crap; it's mind-boggling, and it's not all just sloppy journalism. I mean, a lot of it is. A lot of it's just people who don't check their facts. They make assumptions, all this sort, but it's pretty obvious also some of it is deliberate to try to move the public. Chris Williamson's here, and we're going to talk to him. Here we go. Hey, Chris.
Hey, how are you?
You can hear me, right?
I can hear you loud and clear, sir.
'Cause we're live here. Nice
Yeah.
setup you have there.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, so tell us a little bit about the Vanish podcast.
Yeah, sure. Well, thank you for having me on. Vanished is a podcast where we're finished with our third season. We're in hiatus right now. We just did our very first live trial by jury on the Mary Celeste at a podcast convention in Austin, which was a lot of fun. But we've been doing it for about 3 years now. First year was all entirely the Amelia Earhart, Fred Noonan disappearance. We went from the cradle to the disappearance in the 85 years up to that point, or 82
So
years up to
hold it,
that
just a
point.
second. Just a second. So
Uh-huh.
you did 50 episodes on this?
Well, on Earhart, I've done probably so for Chasing Earhart, we've done a little over 100 now, probably 112, 113
So that's
episodes.
at least 100 hours, right?
Oh, yes, yeah, some of those episodes, yeah, are long, 2, 3
Holy
hour long
shit.
episodes. So, yeah, we do. Vanished, we're very well known for deep dives. We just got off a real deep dive into Zodiac. We did about 15 hours of content just on that one case alone. Um, First season of Earhart, for Vanished Amelia Earhart, we did probably 40 hours, 45 hours of content in one season, on Earhart. So yeah, we go deep dives. Some of our episodes are 4.5 hours long each. They're,
Okay,
you know,
you brought this up, and we weren't planning to talk about this tonight, so I just want to cut to the chase. Have you figured the Mary Celeste thing out?
no. The Mary Celeste was a real fun one. We did it live for our first trial by jury live. My partner Jen Taylor ran that down at the True Crime Podcast Festival in Austin,
So it's like a
Texas.
mock jury,
So
is that what it is?
yeah, it was like a mock trial, and actually they played historical figures, and they kind of rewrote the whole trial book and prosecuted it as if it was a modern day, jury trial case, and that's kind of what we do
What did the
for
jury
Vanished.
decide?
The jury decided, I believe it was actually a hung jury on that one, if I'm not
Oh,
mistaken.
really?
Yeah, so they were kind of
Yeah.
like they couldn't decide, but they had some pretty good fierce advocates on both sides for for everybody involved. So it
Okay,
was
so
a
when
lot
I
of fun.
proposed the 2 subject matters tonight, I did not realize that I knew you wrote a book on one of them, but I didn't know you'd written a book on both of them. Matter of
I
fact,
have.
I'm gonna put the book up on the screen here, and, we will link to it on our blog. So,
Okay.
yeah, well, where is it? It did not show up. Oh, here it is, right, there we go. Okay, there we go.
Sweet.
So, yeah.
There they
So
are. There they
those are
are.
your 2 books off of the
Yes.
store on your website, and we'll link
Yes.
to that too, you know?
Yes.
So, oh, and by the way, is one of these books like 800 pages long?
Yeah, that's my Earhart book. It's basically everything I've done in the last 20 years on Earhart, and there's probably 50 experts that participated in that book. It's a little over 800 pages long, and that's actually not the longest cut. We have what I call a director's cut. That's about 75 pages longer than that. that hasn't been released yet. So it's
All
got
right,
like a whole
so
other
we
segment
got
in
we
it.
got an aero not aerodynamic and what's the word I'm looking for? Aero oh
Like
geez.
aviation.
An AV, thank you. And I'm looking
Yeah.
with we got an aviation theme going here. So
Yeah.
to start out, can you just briefly explain to everybody who Amelia Earhart is and what happened?
Yeah, sure. Amelia Earhart was an icon that came up in the golden age of aviation, 1920s, 1930s. Her career was only professionally about 9 years long, so it's very short for an
Oh,
aviatrix
wait,
at that
let me
time.
stop here for a second. I'm assuming this has occurred to you while you've done all this work on her.
Mhm.
Isn't it astonishing how quickly early aviation took off?
Yeah,
I
yeah.
mean,
No pun intended, right?
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, no,
absolutely.
correct. No, it isn't.
Yeah.
Because I mean, okay, they flew the first flights in December '03.
Mhm.
I understand they sent a press release out after that day. No one believed them.
Mhm.
So then they took the planes on tour, and people were literally fainting. I
Yeah.
mean, they could not believe these machines could fly. They literally couldn't
Yeah.
wrap their mind around it. And
Yeah.
God, and so then what, 12 years later, there's planes in the World War. I mean,
Yeah.
it's astonishing. It's just astonishing how quick it happened. Anyway, I
Yeah.
interrupted you. Keep on
No.
going.
No, no, that's and that's right where our subject fits in. She was very uninterested in aviation actually when she first kind of was exposed to it. She, didn't think much of it, didn't wasn't really that impressed. It wasn't until she went up in the air herself as a passenger with then pilot Frank Hawks, who was a World War One pilot, who was gave her first flight. She famously says, "As soon as I was out, as soon as I was off the ground, I knew I had to fly," and it was all she wrote for her. It was like she rediscovered what she wanted to do with the rest of her life and her career. And she stepped right into aviation head first, and she absolutely took over everything that she touched. It was incredible. Her career in the span of 9 years is probably one of the most spectacular runs in all of aviation history. The things that she
I
did.
brought this up before you came on.
Mhm.
She didn't just set records as a female pilot, she set records as a pilot, period,
She
right?
set records in flight, yeah,
Yeah,
which is pretty amazing, speed records and altitude records and, records in various aircraft and experimental aircraft, to boot, with the auto gyro record and all those crazy things that she did. She was an adventurer in every aspect. She was one of those types of people that, you could just it's like a female version of Indiana Jones almost. Like, they could just they went and just did things. They
yeah.
were adventurers. They loved everything. They loved fast cars, and she loved, obviously fast planes and all this stuff. So she was a grease monkey at the end of the day. She loved to tinker on stuff. She loved to work on engines and aircraft parts, and she loved to know the mechanics of the aircraft and how Morse code worked and all these different things, that really truly inspired her,
You're
as she inspired others.
talking about people doing shit. I have a friend of mine whose brother works at NASA, and
Yeah.
he now this is like 30 years ago. He told me this. He said, "Jim, you know that trip we made to those trips to the moon in the 1960s and 70s?" He
Yeah.
said, "We can't get our shit together now to do that." Isn't that
Yeah.
terrible?
Yeah.
It's like
Yeah.
it's
It
like
is.
people. I don't know what it's a study in bureaucracy, basically. You
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
Okay, so what exactly is Amelia Earhart doing that when she was going around the world, correct?
Yeah, that's right. She was equatorially going around the world. She was going to fly around the world, take the longest route possible, so that way she could, there could be no doubt when she got back that she flew around the world and she did it, better and bigger and faster and stronger than anybody else. And that was the idea. She was financed by Purdue for a Lockheed Electra, a brand new state of the art Lockheed Electra. It was they had dubbed it the Flying Laboratory. She was just into her relationship with Purdue there, and she was going to be using all of her findings from around the world, to all her samples, all the things that they would collect all over the world, and they would take them back to Purdue and they would analyze them. So Amelia Earhart was in essence a scientist, which I think is really kind of neat when you look at, everything in the grand scheme of things. So she was heading around the world, and she was, everything took off swimmingly. She had a larger crew. She had her husband George Putnam. She had her technical advisor. She had Paul Mance, I should say, who was her
And this
technical
is this
advisor.
is this 1934? When is
This is
this?
19 this was in 1937 when she's getting ready to take off on the world flight, which is the
Okay,
big
all
one.
right.
She had set all the Pacific Ocean hops and the Atlantic Ocean hops, and she'd set the altitude records and the speed records, and there was only one way up, one way else to go, and that would be around the world equatorially. So they actually left. The world flight took off from Oakland, and from Oakland to Honolulu, set another record along the way. And when they landed at Honolulu and took off, on the next leg of the tour or the next leg of the flight, that is when everything changed. And that was, I believe, on March the 20th of 1937. I could be wrong. 36. I might be wrong on my years.
Okay,
But
but
yeah.
there's something I think you've corrected me here too. Before you came on, I thought that she was flying west to east, but she was flying east to west.
Yeah, so originally she was actually taking off from Oakland, and then from Oakland to Honolulu, and then from Honolulu she was going to fly to Howland Island, which is where everything changes for her and where the disappearance takes place and everything. So Howland was originally going to be very, very early on in the run, but because she ground looped and actually had an accident on Luke Field in Hawaii, then they had to actually rebuild the entire aircraft, which not only changed the time of year of the flight, but it also changed the direction of the flight. And it went from east to west, and then it went from west to east. So
Oh,
it
so I
ended up
was right
flying
about
east.
that. She did fly,
Yeah,
and she ended up doing west to east. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
So, am I right about this too? That Howland Island is basically like a tiny. It's basically an airstrip and nothing else.
Yeah, yeah, basically, if you Google Earth search Howland Island right now, and if you Google Earth search Nikamororo Island and some of the other ones that we'll probably talk about tonight, you'll notice that they are little floating specks of rice in the middle of the ocean. Basically, Howland Island was a refueling point. It was a place where a plane like Earhart's could lay down. They could catch a little bit of R&R. On this particular journey, they had a Coast Guard cutter, the Itasca, that was stationed off of the coast of Howland Island, just off the shore. And they were going to guide Earhart in, and they were going to go ahead and refuel her flight. And they were going to go ahead and provide him with a little R&R, maybe have him stay overnight, and they were going to take off from Howland to Honolulu, and then from Honolulu to Oakland. So
So
that's kind of
where did she take off from to get to Howland Island?
so to
Across
get to
the Pacific?
Howland Island, the last leg of her flight, the last leg is really where everything changes. It was from Ley New Guinea. So they had been almost all the way around the world, which is kind of adds to the tragedy of the situation.
Yeah.
They ended up at Ley New Guinea, and at Ley they had some personnel unfitness issues, and Amelia Earhart sent a telegram to George Putnam, her then husband and publisher, of course, and business manager, that said that they were going to stay an extra day, personnel unfitness. We don't know if that means that she was referring to Fred Noonan, specifically being hungover after having one too many drinks and just wasn't
And
ready to kind of do his job. But
you
that's
please explain. He was the only other person actually on the airplane with her, right?
That's correct. Yes, Fred
Yeah.
Noonan is a. If you Google him, you will find that Fred Noonan is. When I say the man wrote the book on celestial navigation, I mean that literally. He wrote the book for Pan Am. He wrote all of Pan Am's flight manuals. He did all the he ran all the Pan Am clippers across the Atlantic and the Pacific. He mapped that entire ocean. He knew everything about it. If there was any man on the face of the earth that you wanted to have on board that aircraft with you, it would have been Fred Noonan. So that was her navigator, and his specialty was celestial navigation, which works off of working finding specific points on the planet based off of celestial beings in the sky, celestial points in the sky.
Was he also
So
in charge of the radio communications?
yeah, so Fred Noonan really didn't work the radio too much. It was mainly just Earhart. Fred was sort of in the back of the plane.
Uh-huh.
He had a navigator station and a hatch in the back of the plane that he had he'd have his sextant, and he'd take his readings and his lines and all of his shots and everything he used. He would take all that from that point, and Earhart would actually stay up front and captain the aircraft. And interestingly enough, the way they would signal messages back and forth to each other is they had set up a little pulley system where they would stick a note on a little rope and they would just run the pulley back and forth until the note got back to Noonan, and then Noonan would respond to the note or whatever, or say yeah, okay, or whatever to Earhart, and that's how they'd know. So that's how they communicated most of the time. There are lags. There are points where Noonan would have made his way up front and sat in the co-pilot seat. alongside Earhart. Maybe even did some of the flying potentially if Earhart needed a break for a few moments or needed to stretch her body or whatever. That's not out of the ordinary that Nuna would have stepped in and flown the plane for just a short period of time. So yeah, that's kind of what they did. It was a it was a co-pilot. It was co-pilot situation. It was a main pilot and a navigator slash he could fly if he needed to fly.
So how long was the flight supposed to be from New Guinea to Howland Island?
2,556 miles.
In time? How long is that? Or what did they
About
expect it to be?
about 20 hours.
And I assume that by the time she got there, she's almost dead on fuel, right?
Yeah, well, that's a really that's a really loaded question.
Okay.
So it really depends on what you believe. So a lot this is where theory starts to introduce itself into the case, and I don't know if you want me to start going into theory now on Earhart or
Yeah,
not.
let's do it.
Um,
I
okay,
wanna
so
hear what you have to say.
so theory is very interesting in this case. We have several theories. There's probably over a dozen well-known theories. We covered 5 on the show. So I'll go through the 5 that we covered very briefly. It
Okay.
starts with the most commonly accepted theory, which is crash and sink or ditch and sink. And you can hear it a couple different ways. And that's what former aviation icon Elgin Long championed. That's what Nauticos believes. That's what Rockwell Collins believes. Some of the brightest minds on the face of the earth happen to believe that Earhart simply had a very bad day and ran out of fuel somewhere around the 200-ish mile vicinity of Howland Island in various directions. Could be northeast, northwest, southwest, southeast. We don't know exactly where. We do know that every deep ocean search since the very first one in 1999 has struck out. Nobody has found the aircraft. You're looking for a 55-foot aircraft in an area that's the size of roughly Texas. So it's very expensive, and it costs costs a lots of money to go down there, $3 to $4 million a day
And
for that. That's
no one's ever found a piece of it either, right?
no one's ever found a piece of it. No one's ever found anything that's washed up on shore. What's really interesting about that plane or that particular theory is the call outs. If you listen to Earhart and you listen to the S5's signal strengths and you listen to the Itasca call logs, those are sort of like the final text messages in a domestic violence murder case situation. You got to listen to those. Those all really do kind of support the idea that she just was on that line and was close. Even Leo Bellarts, who was aboard the Itasca, who was talking to Earhart, was actually the chief radio man on the Itasca. He said specifically he stepped outside the radio room expecting to see her fly right overhead, and she never showed up. That's how close that they felt that she was. So that is crash and sink. Okay, that's basically what it states. It
Is
states
there
that
any
she
theory or chance or any speculation that she overshot the island?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, there is theory that she did overshoot the island. She did say she was on the line 157337 north and south on that line. So she was doing everything that she was supposed to be doing. She was saying everything she was supposed to be saying, and her final word that she ever spoke was the word wait. And 87 years later, we're still waiting, which is an interesting concept in and of itself. So that is ground zero. So if I look at ground zero, I look at Howland Island. That's where she was supposed to end up, and that's where she was aiming for. So every one of these other theories I'm going to give you are going to take you further and further from ground zero. The next closest theory is Nicomaroro, which is about 400 miles away ish from um, Howland Island. And the theory goes that she happened to continue north and south on that until north she ran into what was called Gardner Island at the time, but it's called Nicomaroro Island now, and she was able to put the plane down on a coral atoll there. And it was probably a pretty rough landing. We suspect that Fred Noonan potentially lost his life on this landing, that he got hit in the head and it was a fatal head injury. He maybe never made it out of the plane. But Earhart, ironically enough, was able to send post loss radio signals using the engines during low tide on her Lockheed Electra. She was able to do this for several days until the current takes the Electra over for good and basically destroys it and smashes it into a million pieces off that really jagged coral reef off the course of Nicomaroro. She lived out her final days, weeks, months, we don't know, on her own or with Noonan. And it's likely that she succumbed to either extreme dehydration or that she was, for lack of a better term, taken over by the wildlife of Nicomaroro Island.
Yeah. So were these post landing messages heard?
Yes, they were picked up quite a bit. They were picked up a lot from, Navy, Coast Guard, all over the world. They were picked up, but they were also picked up by a lot of amateur ham radio operators, and they were also picked up by a lot of fakers who continued to spread fake news at the time that they actually were Earhart, or they had heard Earhart, or they had heard her on this island or this island. They cased every island you can imagine in that area at the time. It was the biggest search in the middle of the Great Depression that you can possibly imagine, spending millions of dollars a day. You got to keep in mind Earhart was very, very close with Eleanor and FDR. This would have been somebody that they would have put all the stops. They would have gone
Uh-huh.
all through to search for. So, yeah, it's one of those situations where it could have been. It could have been that they just never saw her on the island. It's possible that she just, wasn't in a position where she can make herself be known. That's very possible.
After
So,
talking about this for 100 over well over 100 hours, do you buy the fact that some of those receptions were legitimate of that the
yeah, I do. I do. If you look at some of that, I think what Tiger has built over the course of 40-ish years, and I think 13 or 14 investigations out into that island, I think it's incredibly it's admirable. A lot of great circumstantial information, a lot of really great stuff. I know that there was a just a breaking news recently. I got a bunch of emails over the course of the last couple of days about a very important artifact. I think it's called Tiger Artifact V221, if I'm not mistaken. That artifact was just proven not to be off of an Electra. It was a patch panel that they felt was off an Electra. It was just proven that it was actually not off an Electra. It was off a different plane entirely. So I know that that made the news. I know that Rick Gillespie of Tiger sort of formally admitted that they had it wrong on that, which kudos to him for that, because it's difficult to do when you're so invested in something. I can imagine it's hard to do that. So
Yeah,
there's always something going on.
I'm assuming, if you don't mind my diverting for a second, I'm assuming that's part a problem with what you do. I'm way into the UFO thing, and it's
Hmm.
just astonishing how many people, just can't admit that they're wrong because they're too
Hmm.
emotionally invested in what they're doing, and I find
Yeah.
that kind of sad. And
Yeah.
also it totally screws the any investigation up too. I mean, it's like, you
Yeah.
got people just grasping at straws and alright,
Yeah.
so let me get back to, this what the Nicaragua Island,
Yeah. Nicomororo is where we're at. That's
okay,
so that's basically Nicomororo in a nutshell.
alright,
Um,
question number 2. I'm assuming this island has been searched head to toe, right?
Yeah, it's been searched pretty well. They've done a lot of great searches over the years. They've built up a lot of circumstantial evidence to support the idea that they were castaways there for a time, and they stick behind it. And they believe that they were. That's what ended up happening to them. I will say that they had a documentary called Expedition Amelia that just went out. Was on. I think you can get it on Disney Plus right now. It's a National Geographic piece. They went out. Tiger went out with Bob Ballard in tow and the Nautilus in tow, and the Nautilus was unable to find any kind of wreckage off the coast of Nicomoro Island of any kind. So the search continues. It's going to be one of those things that will continue, I think, for a very long time.
Yeah, but just by the process of elimination, if you're convinced that some of these post-landing or post-crash messages were legit, that
Yeah.
means she survived, doesn't it?
Yeah, for a time, sure.
Yeah.
It does mean that she survived. If it's possible that, that she was on that island, if she was on that island and she did perish there, then she did survive on that island for a time, whether it was a couple days, couple weeks, couple months, we don't know. But it's a really compelling island. It's a very interesting island to be on, and it's one of those crime scenes, as part of this case that will never go away. Like Nicomoro Island is a big one.
So what's your theory number 3?
So theory number 3 is probably the biggest one of them all, and it would probably take you could do an entire show on that alone, and that's something known as the Japanese capture hypothesis. And that basically states, now this takes them roughly around 850 miles away to the Marshall Islands in Saipan. This theory was brought about by a lot of the locals who were there at the time when Earhart and Noonan either crash landed in the Marshall Islands in Saipan or were shot down there and were taken into custody by the Japanese, who again, this can kind of go anywhere you want it to go. Some people believe that the Japanese knew exactly who they had. They knew they had Amelia Earhart and Fred Noonan. Other people will say that they didn't have any idea who they had. They didn't even know what a white woman looked like. They had nobody over there at the time that looked like them at all. Especially a woman dressed like Earhart with with pants, and they called her, she was a lady dressed like a man, basically.
Uh-huh.
The theory goes that they were in custody, in Japanese custody, for a time. They It's the worst possible ending for any theory on any part of the case, of course. The theory basically ends with Earhart dying alone in a jail cell in Garapan prison. She dies of dysentery. That's one way that people believe that she died. The other way is that they were actually pushed and tortured for questions because they were thought to be American spies. And Fred Noonan was beheaded and kicked into a shallow grave, and Earhart was shot a couple of times in the chest and then kicked into a shallow grave. So it's a really if that is the case, if they were in the custody of the Japanese, and all the eyewitness testimony behind that theory is true, including eyewitness testimony from the military that were there in the years after the war, and all that, all the stuff there. It's a really big theory, and it's been around since the early 1960s, and it's one that just it seems to always be at the head of the pack when you're discussing what happened to Earhart and Noonan.
How many eyewitnesses are we talking about that have come forward?
Initially, a little over 200.
Holy shit! I thought you were
Yeah.
going to say like 7.
Yeah. No,
My God.
when you get to that was the first question I remember ever asking Jen, my co-host for Vanished. I said, "Look it, if I was going to prosecute a historical mystery case, and part of what I was going to present to you and to the jury was 200 counts, 200 eyewitness counts of testimony in various aspects of showing Earhart and Noonan, as a defense attorney, how would you defend against that? How does that work? Can that be admissible? How does eyewitness testimony work?" And that's kind of what birthed what Vanished would become, which was a real, like, legal historical mystery kind of show, which is really exciting. It's
I've
just kind
never
of
asked you, have you done anything on Roswell? Have you done anything about that?
no, we haven't done any paranormal really yet. We've stayed for the most part. We did, we did Earhart. We've done our fair share of serial killers. We opened season 2 with Jack the Ripper, which was really horrific. We did DB Cooper, which was not a serial killer, of course, but another.
Yeah.
Well, people
Well,
say a good guy, bad guy. I guess that's debatable. And then we just wrapped Zodiac, which certainly was a very bad
the
guy.
reason I brought that up is because Roswell's got an enormous amount of attention over the years, but I'm one of those people. I'm not. We The only thing known for certain about Roswell is that something crashed. That's for
Right,
certain. No
right,
doubts that. But
right,
I'm not. I am not convinced. Even though I'm a UFO guy, I'm not convinced it was an extraterrestrial spacecraft. But the
right.
reason I bring that up is because there's about 200 witnesses at Roswell who said it
Hmm.
was, and
Hmm.
it's like you brought up here. It's very hard to discount that many people. It really
Yeah.
is. You
Yeah,
know?
when you get to 200, it becomes very hard to ignore, for sure.
Yeah.
You have to look at that, and that's what we did. We went through. We didn't go through all 200 of them. We think we went through just a sampling of them, sampling of some of the biggest witnesses and everything, and we went through that, and that was really impressive to go through that process and to kind of go through their stories and kind of build this lore of Amelia Earhart in Saipan and in the Marshall Islands, which is a really incredible story in and of itself.
And correct me if I'm wrong here. There's supposedly a few really grainy, murky photos too, right?
So there is a photo. There was a photo that came out. Was at the history. It was at the center of the History Channel documentary called Amelia Earhart: The Lost Evidence. It came out back in 2017. It's known as the Jaluit doc photo.
Uh-huh.
It's if you Google Amelia Earhart Jaluit or just Amelia Earhart doc photo, you'll easily see it. What's really interesting about that photo is the not necessarily the Earhart being the one giving away, but Fred Noonan in that particular photo. The work that they did on the lost evidence with the match for Fred Noonan was really pretty impressive stuff. And that is a really, really good, striking image of Fred Noonan. It looks like it could be him. They argue, the people that believe in that photo, that really support that photo, really argue the fact that there were no other white Americans, Westerners in the Marshall Islands at that time. There's no one else. It had to have been them. And it looks an awful lot like it may have been them which
And
is
what are
pretty
they do?
impressive.
What are they doing in the photo? What's the
So
composition of
it,
the
the
photo?
context of the photo is basically they're sitting on a dock, surrounded by a bunch of what look like local villagers, but a lot of villagers and were a lot of the military kind of look like local villagers, at the time. So you
Uh-huh.
never know if they were armed or not, if they were under any kind of duress at the moment. It looked like maybe Noonan had a limp of some kind. He was kind of leaning a little bit on something, but he rarely wore white. But that wouldn't be uncommon for him to wear white. I mean, he's had the Fred Noonan Widow's Peak. If you look at all those shots of him, like it looks really clean. They were just basically there. What's another interesting aspect of the photo, if you get the full res version of the photo, in the far right corner of the photo, you see a Japanese barge. It's called the Koshu. It's a ship called the Koshu, and they're towing on a barge, I should say, and that's not called a barge. They're towing on a barge what looks like an aircraft, and looks like it could be the Lockheed Electra 10E on that. So you've got a potential of if there was ever evidence in a photo that would make it a smoking gun, you've got literally potentially Earhart and Noonan in one part of the photo, and on the other side of the photo, you got a barge, the Koshu towing the Lockheed Electra 10E. So you then have both the aviator and the navigator and the plane, all three bodies in one image, which is pretty impressive.
It is. It is. What's theory number 4?
So theory number four is we'll try to truncate this as much as we can. Is run by a gentleman by the name of Bill Snavely. Bill runs a group called Project Blue Angel. Of all the interesting theories out there, this one is my favorite, just because it's the only one that's ever produced an aircraft. We actually have an aircraft at a site in Buka, which is basically farthest east of Papua New Guinea. That's the farthest island east of Papua New Guinea. Um, and the story goes that the aviators, Amelia and Fred, were flying Buka. They were leaving from Ley New Guinea. Buka was about the halfway point, right there between Buka and Ley New Guinea. It's kind of like right in that area.
Uh-huh.
It was the last major airport or last major runway they could have used before they had to kind of go until they can get to Howland. Basically, that was like their no turning back point. And they were actually in the middle of a really great storm. And the theory goes that they were pushing up against a lot of unanticipated headwinds, and that they were eating a lot more fuel than they initially anticipated, and that they had to actually make an executive decision to turn around because their flight radius wasn't looking very strong. And anybody who's an aviator who knows is flight radius is how far can you make it on half a tank of gas,
Right.
basically, and they didn't, according to the theory, they felt that they couldn't make it. So they decided to turn around on the next available runway and land, which would have been Buka. But coming into that storm, they got actually struck by lightning in this theory, which is really crazy. But we have reports of confirmations of storms over Buka, like historically at that time and everything. They've all been traced back, which is really interesting. And when the plane gets struck by lightning, it comes out of the basically out of the clouds, out of the heavens, so to speak, and there's crash lands onto this kind of like right into this coral atoll there, and just kind of crash lands in the water and lands in like 150 feet of water. So it's not even that far down, really. But what happened was there was a young boy on the beach at the time who was just hanging out, and he saw this second coming, is what he called it. Ran back to the villagers and tried to let everybody know there was a plane that came out of he didn't know what to call it, like a flying thing that just came out of the sky. Of course, nobody believed him. Nobody could really hear it because the storms were so loud. We were talking like, I don't know if you've ever been in the middle of like a really loud thunderstorm, but
Oh yeah.
things can be disguised,
Right.
and we're talking running a couple miles back to the village. So it's very possible they just missed it and just didn't hear it. And you fast forward 90 years later, and they're free diving for sea cucumbers, I believe, down there. And lo and behold, they come across the twin-tailed, twin-engine aircraft, non-military origin, 55-foot wingspan, 39.5-foot long. It kind of matches a lot of the same characteristics. Um, then enter Bill Snavely, who was kind of poking around down in Buka anyway, and was told by one of the leaders, the elders down there, "Hey, we have this plane. I don't know if it's your plane, the one you're looking for, but I can have some divers go down, rudimentary divers, and check it out for you and let you know what you think." And they went ahead and did that. Bill gave him some characteristics for it, for them to check, and they do so, and everything seems to match, and which really gets Bill's attention. So Bill starts working on the time and the distance and the fuel, and he starts to realize that 70% of her route had never been searched by anybody. They were only focusing on that last 30% because of the radio callouts.
Uh-huh.
Well, he was able to explain how Skip can take S5 and skip that and make it an S5 signal from thousands of miles away. It happens all the time. They've kind of gone through this whole process of working the time, the distance of fuel. Actually, they took off with a lot less fuel than they were supposed to take off with initially. There's little things here and there that add up, and then
Right.
at the end of the equation, you've got this aircraft that no one's ever been able to produce, and it looks an awful lot like it could be Amelia Earhart's aircraft. And it's just one of those things. He's going to be able to get out there and try to get a third expedition out there to get all the proper tools. And it'll be the first cross theory expedition that's ever been done in the history of the case, which I'm very proud of personally. And I think
That's
they've got
cool.
something
Good for
really
you.
special. Yeah, I think it's very special. So we'll see. And if you get to eliminate that, then you're down to four. Then you can start eliminating some other ones, and that's how
But
you do that in
they
cases like
haven't
these.
been able to actually confirm that it's an Electra?
Not yet. No, it's
Oh,
wrapped in about 4.5 feet of coral. It's basically the
oh,
ghost of a shell right now. So, and it's
right.
in a really one of the most unstable nautical environments in the face of the earth. So
Yeah.
it's a little crazy,
So just to wrap that theory up, the assumption is that basically she crashed there, right?
Right, that's where she's
Right.
at.
And
Yeah.
then they both died either drowned
Right.
or right. Now
Right.
what's their final theory?
So the final theory is sort of a break off of Japanese capture. It's known as the Irene Bolam hypothesis. It's also known as repatriation. It's also known as a couple of other things. Basically, it's like a choose your own adventure ending to Japanese capture. The only difference between this one and that one is A, she lives, or B, she dies.
Uh-huh.
If you know of a woman by the name of Jackie Cochran was a very, very famous female women aviator herself. She was a founder of the Wasp, and she was, a pretty amazing person and one of Earhart's closest friends. She was actually sent over to Japan some years later after Earhart was declared dead in absentia and all that stuff. And a lot of people believe that she was sent over to get her friend, to smuggle her friend out of Japan. They had worked out a deal to get her. They had held her for that long. There is some of the rumor that shows that Earhart was there for somewhere upwards of 5 to 7 years, potentially in Japanese custody.
Uh-huh.
And she goes and she gets her, and with the help of a few locals and a few people that are well placed in the government, she puts her in the hands of someone on the East Coast named Monsignor Francis Kelly, and he helps her sort of kind of break back into. Remember, she's been declared dead in absentia. She doesn't exist. Basically, her whole position at that point is that she lives on the East Coast and she just never flies again. She just basically lives a totally different life and is not the same
Okay.
person anymore.
Forgive me, that sounds like an Elvis is alive there scenario,
Yeah,
you know? I
it
mean,
it is.
I have a hard time believing that, especially with someone who's so driven. I mean,
Yeah,
I suppose you could have the life psychically beaten out of you after 7 years, but still,
yeah,
I don't
yeah.
know. That
Yep.
yeah, so, okay, so of these 5 theories, is number 4 the one you're kinda leaning toward yourself?
Number 4 is where I'm leaning to start. That's what I would say. I would say you kinda have to start there because of the plane. You have to get that either eliminated, or you have to rule you gotta rule that in or rule that out. That's how you do it,
Uh-huh.
because that's where you start, and I think you work your way from there. There's multiple active investigations going on in this case right now. They're going on behind the scenes, and I'm privy to a couple of them, and it's really kind of neat to see how things are working. I think everybody's working really hard, and I think we're going to have an answer one way or another, hopefully very soon.
That's actually pretty cool.
I think Earhart will be finally, put to bed finally pretty soon
Has
here.
the government helped you or hurt you in any way in your search?
Well, the government doesn't do a whole lot for FOIA investigations. I can tell you that. Anything with Earhart, there's just not much to report, or
Uh-huh.
they just deny the FOIA investigation. We know that there is an Earhart file. It could be the most boring file on the face of the earth, or it could be, the truth. It could be what happened to them being
Yeah,
spies, maybe, or it could have been, Lindbergh was a spy. Like a lot of that stuff
right,
wasn't unheard of.
right.
They used a lot of famous people to do that.
Yeah,
And so, you could get some stuff that's really important, but I think, not only would it affect Earhart, it would affect FDR, who was one of the most beloved presidents we ever had. So if FDR left America's sweetheart out, to dry basically and to be killed by the Japanese, that would hurt his record. That would
Yeah.
tarnish his record some.
Doing
So,
this you've been doing this for a few years. You know what I've learned? Is some of the craziest shit's actually true, and some of the most
mhm.
believable shit isn't.
Right. Yep. Yep.
That's what I've
That's
learned.
that's why we use inductive reasoning. That's why we do it on the show. We want to hear it all, man. We want to hear all of it because
Yeah.
otherwise, if you can't do it, then what else are you gonna do? You know?
Okay, so let's move on to DB Cooper. It's the day before
Ah,
Thanksgiving, November 1971, and at SeaTac Airport, right?
yep.
So a guy named Dan Cooper gets on a Northwest Airlines. I'm sorry, then it was Northwest Orient Airlines flight
Yeah.
to Portland, which is it's really like a 20-minute flight. It's nothing, you
It's
know.
nothing.
It's
It's
nothing.
nothing.
As soon as the plane takes off, he gives one of the stewardesses, and they were stewardesses then, they're flight attendants
Yeah.
now, a note
Right.
that says, "I got a bomb. Talk to me and take it from there. You explain it."
Well, yeah, you did a good job. Geez, how do I say? So let me tell you how I've come to understand it in the simplest form.
Okay, please.
So, I'll repeat a little bit of what you said. So, on the afternoon of November 24th, it's 1971, the night before Thanksgiving, as you said, he's an otherwise normal, unassuming guy. He calls himself Dan Cooper. He approaches the counter of Northwest Orient Airlines in Portland, Oregon, and he uses cash to buy a one-way ticket on Flight 305 heading to Seattle, Washington, as you
Yeah,
said, just about a
I got the
20,
direction confused. Thank you.
yeah,
Yeah,
just about 20-minute flight.
right,
He boards the plane. In fact, he's one of the very last to board. He sits somewhere near the back. This is before assigned seating, of course.
right,
Several minutes after takeoff, he hands a note to one of the flight attendants. Her name is Florence Schaffner, and well, she thinks nothing of it. She thinks it's just another dude, passing her his number. They get hit on all the time,
right.
so she ignores the note. And after several minutes pass, he's a semi agitated Cooper. He kind of nudges her again and says, "Miss, you better look at that note. I have a bomb." Now, I would imagine the threat becomes pretty instantly real for Florence in that moment. He then asks her to sit next to him, and of course, she's going to do what he asks at this point. Florence asked to see the bomb, so Cooper shows it to her. She described it as she said, a mass of wires, red colored sticks, and he had demanded that she write down what he told her. Before she knows it, she's walking another note to the captain of the plane that demanded 4 parachutes and $200,000 in $20 bills.
Are you in agreement that most people now think the bomb was fake?
I'm about 90% positive, 95% positive the bomb was fake.
Yeah,
Yeah,
right,
it was made to look real. It
right,
was made by
right.
someone who knew what they were doing, but just didn't
Yes,
really arm it.
right,
So he, when the flight lands in Seattle, Cooper he exchanges the flight 36 passengers for the money and the parachutes. So it's really important to note here that of the 36 passengers, other than the crew, nobody knew they were being skyjacked. Okay,
right.
so this guy was very calm and collected. He
Yeah,
keeps several crew members, and the plane takes off again. Now he's ordered to set course to Mexico City.
yeah. And was it $200, $200,000 in 20s? Is that what it
20s.
was? 20s,
Yeah,
right?
$20 bills. Yeah.
Yeah. Now I'm
And
sure you've calculated this. That money weighs about what? 20, 30 pounds?
yeah, it's heavy.
Right.
It's heavy. It's
Yeah.
definitely heavy. So, somewhere between Seattle and Reno, it's a little after 8 p.m. He does the incredible. He jumps out of the back of the plane with the parachute and the ransom money. The pilots landed safely. Cooper was long gone, and he had just vanished into the night. And his fate remains a mystery to this day. We only know him for about 5 hours. He only exists for about 5 hours. There is no beginning and there's no ending. There's just a multiverse of choices depending on who you believe it is.
Yeah. So at one point, from what I understand, the FBI had 1,000 people they were looking at who matched, at least partially matched the profile of this person. But
Right.
and I don't know, maybe you have a different figure. I understand there's at least 14 people that matched very closely. Am I right
Yeah.
about that?
Yeah, there were several. There might have been 14 people, 13 or 14 people. It was pretty close. They had some people that they brought in early, these are also people that they just kind of questioned, and people they thought that, they looked really good for it, or they fit the demeanor or whatever. The demeanor was the main thing, was how cool and calm this guy was. He had looked like he had done, it's really interesting. Tina was the last person to be with Cooper before he leapt, off the aircraft, and she was headed back to the cockpit to join the rest of the crew. She turned around and took one look at him, and he was finishing up, and she said she noticed that it looked like he had done that 1,000 times before, like putting on the pilot out, or putting on the parachute and getting it ready. Like he had,
Yeah.
it's a guy who had not only, this isn't a guy that knew what he was doing. I mean, he had experience. He had done it a
Right.
lot.
So I'm going to explain here, and I'm sure you know this, that first of all, it was not common knowledge at that time it was a 727 or 37
Yeah, 27.
that the back stairs could be dropped in flight. And also, it turns out, was it the CIA or just the Army in Vietnam used those airplanes to actually have paratroopers jump out of, for that by that very method, you
That's
know?
true.
And
That's
very
true.
few people knew any of that. So
Yeah.
first of all, you're talking about a guy who maybe knew that sort of stuff, and that's not a lot of people, I don't know.
Right. Right. Yeah,
You know?
that's true. That's true. There's a few people. There's a few really great guys. Fun ones, and there's a few suspects we could go through if you'd like.
Oh, please, yeah, please do.
Yeah, so I mean, one of them is Robert Rackstraw. He was a pilot in Vietnam. He left Vietnam under some really kind of shady circumstances, and he continued to do a lot of shady things after he left. He
Yeah,
was a slippery guy. He kind of liked the bad guy image.
yeah, he's passed
And
away now, right?
what's that?
He's passed away, right?
He has passed away. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Matter
and
of fact, let me ask you, are any of these people still alive?
most of them are gone. Most of them are gone now.
Uh-huh.
There's not there was one guy that was alive not too long ago, and he recently passed. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, you're talking
Um,
about, it's been 52 years, and on
mhm.
top of that, his age, Cooper's age was guessed at about 40, right?
Yeah,
So
he was, like, in his mid-40s. The people kept saying he was looked like he was in his mid-40s, and that's kind of the problem with, like, the Robert Rackstraws and some of these other really good ones. Robert Rackstraw was only 27 at the time of the skyjacking. So this
right.
guy, either he made himself look 40, 20 years older, or, he just wasn't him, it just wasn't him.
But
So,
there's one thing about the famous, composite drawings of Cooper, and that is he looks astonishingly generic.
yeah.
I mean, he could have been almost anybody, maybe with a possible exception of the hairline, but still,
Yeah.
it's like
Yeah.
he's an American guy. I mean, shit,
Yeah.
So, I don't
Yeah.
know, you know?
No, he is. He is. He's one of the yeah, it's just like an all-American dude. He looks like it could have been any dude, could have
Right.
that's why it's such a crazy case. Is like he's such a generic looking guy,
I
It
I
was
was reading I bought your book on this and was
Oh,
reading it.
thank you.
You're welcome. And, the thing I found interesting is that, I keep wanting to say the guy's name is Sheridan Whiteside, but that's a character in a movie. What is this guy's name? Sheridan what?
Oh, Sheridan Peterson.
Yeah, Sheridan Peterson, that, and, Eric, is it Ulti? How do you pronounce his last name?
Eric Eulis.
Euless, thank you.
Yeah.
That he eliminated Peterson simply because Peterson didn't smoke. And
Right.
I never thought about that. That's a really interesting, yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
because Cooper plowed through about 9 cigarettes during the
Yeah,
flight.
he sure did. He smoked a lot of them.
It's pretty obvious he was a chain smoker, and,
Right.
and yeah, so, yeah, and apparently Peterson never smoked ever. So,
Yeah, a very powerful piece of testimony by Eric Eulis when
yeah,
I interviewed him for that, because that really, he taught a lesson there. He taught a lesson in learning to let go of somebody that you really think is the guy that you poured a lot of your time and effort and resources into. And that, it's a valuable lesson that a lot of people in historical mystery can learn, I think.
of all the pictures I've seen of all these potential suspects, I thought Peterson looked most like the composite picture. That's
Yeah.
what I thought,
Yeah.
you
He
know?
looked good. He's a good look. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, yeah, he was a
it's
good,
but it's tough when your composite's such a generic one, It's so
yeah,
tough because, yeah, you kinda mess yourself up with that composite sketch,
that's right.
but that's right from the eyewitnesses, so, I mean, that's what you're gonna get,
Okay, mention someone else. Who else are we talking about?
Oh gosh, we could do. Let's give you another one. John List. No, we'll talk about Kenny Christensen. That's a big one. Brad Meltzer, a buddy of mine. He loves Kenny Christensen. He's
Uh-huh.
did decoded on him and everything. He worked for Northwest Orient Airlines at the time, and he was sort of like unhappy with some of the going on in the company. He had a grudge against it. There was strikes, there were protests going on. You get odd weird hours, long shifts. You might work, 3 or 4 16-hour days in a row, going across the Pacific Ocean. Just kind of like, a lot of work. Um, and he had a grudge against Northwest Orient Airlines. He was also a paratrooper, and he took freelance jumping assignments that would pay him extra money. So, and he looks very similar to the sketch if you look at him. There's a weird picture of him. You Google it, dressed like Cooper, and he's holding a briefcase and a weird like bank bag type thing, and it
Yeah,
makes it makes for like a really really interesting picture.
right.
Yeah, I mean, what puts him apart though is he continued to work for that same airline for years and years after the skyjack. So I just don't see the guy pulling off a skyjack like that and going back to work for the same company like
Well,
nothing
other
happened.
than the buried money on the Columbia River, the 5 grand, none of the money ever turned up, right?
None of the none, yeah, $5,800 is what was found. And that was found on Tina Bar. And yeah, other than that, that's all the money we have. So we have 193,000 some change out there floating around of DB Cooper money that could have been lost or spent or donated. Can you imagine that?
Oh,
We
yeah.
heard we had that bombshell dropped on us when we were doing the original recording, and I thought about like, man, what if this guy donated the money?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That would take that Robin Hood persona and just amplify it to 11.
Yeah, and I
If
never
that
thought of that
happened.
ever. That never
Yeah,
occurred to me.
it
There's a
never
lot of
occurred to you.
people a lot of people
Mhm.
who think that money on Tina Bar was actually planted. Do you?
Yeah. No, I don't think so. I think the money either fell off them and or hit the water and it would just kind of was in a bushel and it sat there and I don't think he planted it. If you're going to go with the idea that he donated the rest of it, maybe you could say that he planted the money there and then to throw off a cent and then he just donated the rest of it. You could say that. But I think it's more likely though that he just lost a chunk of the money in it.
But
That's
it's
that's
a
what I
weird
think.
way if you planted that money, there's no way to think, matter of fact, you'd have to assume it wouldn't be found. It was buried in the sand, you
Yeah,
know?
yeah, it was buried in the sand until that family came along and he
What are the chances of that happening? I mean,
yeah,
you
yeah,
know?
sure.
Although,
That's
am I right about this? That the father of that family was actually kind of, suspect for a little while?
Yeah, there was some that well, he was part of a plan. He was part of like a larger plan. They were saying like, "Oh, look, they're gonna these this couple right here." They were at a party like a week or so prior to that, and they're like, "You see that couple right there? Like
Yeah,
this couple's gonna find that money. He's gonna find the money. That's how I'm gonna prove to you I'm Cooper or this guy's Cooper or whatever." And sure enough, they end up finding the money. So it's an interesting like story,
yeah.
you know.
So, do you if you're a betting man, who would you put money on, of all these suspects, who do you think did it? Or do you
Yeah,
think it's
we
someone completely different?
Yeah, I think it's something completely different. We picked a dark horse, in Take the Money and Run. We picked a dark horse, and his name is Ted B. Braden, and we picked him based off of a gentleman by the name of Drew Beeson and his research. Drew Beeson wrote a book called Paratrooper of Fortune.
Uh-huh.
It's a really great book. I suggest everybody check it out. And he basically did his follow up with me, Undertake the Money and Run. We basically built the case of Braden being Cooper based off of Braden's ability, his cool, calm demeanor, his age, his look, a lot of the homework that he did to get this flight taken care of. It was, he was very high in the MACV SOGs. He was very high and knew a lot of the founders of the CIA. He had the contacts, and most importantly, he had a jump record that would put any jump record that is on this list to shame. The guy had, these people had a couple hundred jumps. This guy had thousands of jumps. He specialized in halo jumps. He jumped out of those 727s over Laos and the CIA and in the in the Vietnam era. Um, he enlisted in the Battle of the Bulge. I mean, he got tail into that, and then he got the Vietnam era. I mean, he was a mercenary. He was all about the money. You
Oh,
know.
I was gonna say, did he do it for the money or just for the giggles?
I think he did it for a little. Maybe it was a little bit of both. That's a good question. Maybe
Uh-huh.
just the idea that he could do it. The way Cooper acted on the plane was really it's to me it helps Braden's case the most. Because we talked to people that had known Braden. I talked to in the book the commanding officer at Fort Dix who was the one in charge of handling Braden and when he was in stockade there, and it was like the same kind of guy. He was just cool, calm, collected. The whole situation against him, the whole shit's about to hit the fan, and the guy just like it's all good, man. It's gonna be good. We're gonna be
And,
fine.
Braden's dead now too, I assume?
Braden's dead. He died in 2009. I could be wrong. I could maybe
I've
seven.
heard rumblings about the fact that there's some people who think that Cooper has never been identified because the government or specifically the CIA doesn't want anybody to do it. Have you heard about this or does
That
this
the
tie in with
Yeah.
Braden?
Well, I guess it can and it can't. I mean, we could probably make it. You could probably look into that. That'd be a thread you have to tug on. Why that part would tie into Braden specifically, but Braden knew Jack Singlaub. Braden knew people in the CIA, the higher ups in the CIA in the early days of the CIA. They were friends. They weren't just like buddies. They were drinking buddies. They hang out together a lot. All that
Yeah.
stuff. So, it's possible that that Cooper could have been an inside job, or it could have been somebody that we don't even know yet. Could have been a metallurgist or someone like that. They're doing work on the tie right now, and they think that the tie might lead them to who Cooper might be. Or it shrink Cooper's world a lot. So we can get a
Yeah.
better idea.
So one
So
thing I've heard about this tie is that apparently they found um, residue of titanium on it,
right,
which would be highly indicative of somebody who worked in a factory where airplanes were made. You
yeah,
know, and that's the argument for the fact that Cooper might have worked at Boeing.
right, yeah, absolutely. And again, this case could take you anywhere, and that's kind of the beauty, and that's kind of the fun of these cases as we investigate them. They take us to places all over the place that we didn't know about,
And
and
then on top of that, there's some people saying, well, he borrowed the tie from his dad, so maybe his dad worked. I don't know.
right,
This
yeah,
goes on forever, and
it can go on forever. Yeah, it really
I
can.
admire you for digging into this. I just
Oh
think it's
yeah,
just fascinating. Really,
yeah.
you got a cool gig here going on, man.
Well,
I want
thank
to
you, man.
thank you for spending time with us tonight. Really, it's
Oh
really
yeah,
cool. I hope you'll
yeah.
come back because
I'll come back and I'll be back anytime you'll have me.
there's a zillion other people I want to talk about. So it's like,
Oh,
hey, have you done anything on the JFK assassination?
we're working on it for season 4 of the show. We're working on JFK. Working on. We have Jesse James. We're stepping into next. And then we're doing Alcatraz, which is a fun one, and then we're going to do Hoffa as well.
And forgive me, Chris,
Um,
what part of the country are you in?
I'm just east of Kansas City,
Oh,
basically.
Kansas
Kansas
City,
City.
because we're here in Minneapolis. The Northfield bank robbery is only about 40 miles south of the city.
Oh wow, yeah.
For
Okay,
for
you're
Jesse
right there.
James.
Yeah,
So yeah.
yeah.
Although
Jesse's got a lot of Jesse did a lot of living. He moved all over this country. Yeah, there's Jesse James stuff
yeah,
all over this country, so it's
a
gonna be a
lot of
fun
these
one.
guys did. It's like
Yeah,
take no prisoners, live fast and die young. So
that's right.
you
That's
know.
right.
Well,
Yeah,
hopefully we'll talk to you soon. I really appreciate this a lot. I want to point
yeah.
out to the listeners, we're going to put your books in the on the blog on our website at jimandnight.com. We'll put links to Amazon in there, and we'll talk to you. Thanks.
Thanks.
You
Appreciate you,
take
Jim.
care. Yeah, take
Thank
care of
you.
yourself.
Yep.
Okay, that's Chris Williamson from the Vanish podcast. That was really I hope you enjoyed that. I found that totally fascinating, completely. It's like as you might have noticed, I have a tangential interest with both those cases, and it was just really cool to hear. I mean, they did like 100 episodes on Amelia Earhart. Holy shit! I mean, my God, it's incredible. I don't know if I could talk that long about anything. And if you watch this show, I can talk too. So we're not going to even take any calls tonight. Or if you want to call me up here, just go right ahead. jimandnight.com/call, because we've had, I'll be honest with you, we've had a hard time getting people to call because I think people are not familiar or with this process, because this process is brand new. Talkers Magazine says we're the first talk show in America to take video phone calls, but it's super simple. The few people who have called up in the last month, all I asked every single one of them, was it hard to do? No, it was not hard to do. David from San Francisco said it was harder to find our website than to actually call. That's what he said. So you go to jimandnight.com/call. You click on the giant blue button at the top of the screen. There you go, and you're on. So if you want to give me a call in the next few minutes, you go right ahead. I got a couple of things here. Just to, I generally like to keep the non-political stuff to the end of the show. So I want to start putting them. I'm getting tired of the politics thing, man. It's like, Jesus Christ. Like, it's just bullshit. But at any rate, but I do feel I feel a responsibility to you, the viewer, to actually separate the wheat from the chaff, and hopefully you'll come to trust me to do this, like we did in part one, about the fact I gave you two examples, one conservative and one liberal, of how the press fucks with your mind, and the press will fuck with your mind, because at this point these I hate to talk badly about people, but as a class, these people they're either morons or they're delusional social justice warriors, one or the other, or they're lazy. There's that too. Now, my friend Jennifer Gabani, she's the editor of the collegefix.com, and she was on my podcast and radio shows regularly. Um, she's kind of in what's the word I'm looking for? She's predisposed right now, so she told me she's not coming on here anytime soon. But she that the College Fix is a nonprofit news organization that it's run by student journalists, college journalists, and I can sit here and bitch and moan about how the news media has gone to hell, but she stands up and defends her students. She said to a man and woman, they are of great character and great ability. And meanwhile, George Stephanopoulos gets on television this weekend. Now, Stephanopoulos is probably paid, but based on what I know, about $10 million a year, and he's astonished that Trump's indictments has not lessened his popularity. And I'm thinking, what freaking planet are you living on? It's like, you can't figure this out or why this is happening. I think you shouldn't even have a job if you can't figure it out. But yeah, $10 million later, in three freaking shows he's hosting, whatever, he's on television like 36 hours a week, and he can't figure it out. Okay, fine. So what I got here, I like to talk about the television business, because we're kind of really new at this. Not just us, but what we got going on here is new. I suspect that, and I'd like to think we can get the production values a little better over the course of maybe a few months. But I think shows like this are going to become very, very common. We got a writer's strike and an actor strike going on right now. And not only that, nobody sees the end of this anytime soon. I think there's a possibility that this strike could go on for over a year. And at that point, it will destroy Hollywood completely. I mean, right now, there's no late night television shows on except for Greg Gutfeld. There's no scripted shows on TV at all, and there aren't going to be for the foreseeable future. Hell, if they end the strike tomorrow, it'll take them at least 3 months to get a backlog of scripted shows produced. So, but I got an article here from Fortune magazine, fortune.com. The headline is, Cable TV giant Charter has struck a dagger into Bob Iger, and Disney and ESPN's on the ropes. So what's going on here is that it was time for Disney and Charter, and of course Disney owns both ABC and ESPN, to negotiate. Charter is the second largest cable company in the United States, and they could not come to an agreement. And the CEO of Charter is pretty plain about this. He says, we can't pay that much for ESPN anymore. Now, I've explained this before. Some of you may not realize this. The way the cable television business works, and the reason it's so lucrative for so many people, is because essentially all the cable networks, the cable channels, get paid twice. They sell advertising, of course, They get paid for that based on their viewership. But they also get paid what's called a transmission fee, and that's a portion of your cable bill that goes to each channel every month. And this happened, I can't remember, in like 1978 or something like that. There's some judge ruled, some federal judge ruled they had to do this. They have to do this even for shit that's shown on free on broadcast TV. It may be free on over the air, but the cable company still has to pay the originator because they're retransmitting it. That's the reason. It has to do with copyright issues. So your cable bill, I just read today, the average cable bill currently in the United States, the average is $126 a month. That's mind-boggling. It's just like that's the average. That $126 goes, part of it goes to every single cable channel on your system. Now, you probably, like most people, you probably have at least 70 what's called basic channels. Those are channels you don't have to pay a fee for above and beyond, like HBO or Cinemax or that sort of crap. Of those channels, there's about 70 to 90 of them right now. I don't know the exact count. ESPN gets the most money. ESPN gets about when I say ESPN, I'm also talking about all the ESPN complementary or subsidiary channels: ESPN2, ESPN3, ESPNU, ESPN News, blah blah blah. That set goes for about $7 of your cable bill goes to ESPN or then to Disney because they own it, right? It doesn't matter whether you watch ESPN. $7 of your cable bill, and that's by far the highest of anybody on TV. I think the next one's Fox News, but I think they're only asking a buck and a half. I think so. It's a huge disparity. Um, Charter Communications just said, go stuff yourself. We're not going to pay it. And the reason is because the viewership for ESPN has dropped mightily in the last year or two. A lot of people think, and I think there's something to this, is because a lot of people have gotten sick of listening to the ESPN commentators talk about politics. Where they got the idea that anybody wants to hear about politics on a sports channel is nuts. You watch sports to get away from that shit. That's the reason you're watching. You don't want it's an escape from everyday ordinary life. You don't want to, it's the reason all these sports talk shows. I mean, I couldn't do it. I'll be honest. I'm here. I'm yakking. I like to yak. I like to yak on the radio. I've been doing this for quite a while. I could not do sports talk. I couldn't do it. It's never endingly inane. That's the reason. Years ago, I thought I could do entertain. There's only 3 or 4 things you can talk about on the radio if you're doing talk radio, and by extension, what I'm doing here, and that's politics or news, um, entertainment, sports, or if you want to call it, and paranormal. I'll put that in. That's the 4th thing. So those are the 4 things you can talk about, and why anybody would want to mix politics and sports is beyond me. They're opposites. But at any rate, the point is, ESPN wants their $7, and Charter Communications told them to go fuck themselves. That's what's happening here, and it doesn't look like anybody's going to budge anytime soon. But everybody's saying that this is a harbinger. This is the case that's going to break this whole thing wide open, because it appears that cable television, or what's technically called linear TV, that is anything where you have a channel that's running all the time, 24 hours, and you tune in on the moment, as opposed to any sort of video on demand, which you watch like a podcast from the beginning. I mean, this what we're doing here is a really weird hybrid of both of them. So I'll be interested to see what's going to happen with this type of show. I mean, you go on Twitch right now. We're on Twitch. There's hundreds of shows like this going on right now. Most of them, first of all, no one, as far as we know, no one has the public call in unknowingly. It's usually people are talking to their friends, they're interviewing their friends, or they actually have guests. Some people that do have guests on, but as far as anybody knows, we're the first show to actually take calls, video calls from the public. But so this, and like I said, I think where we got going on here is going to be the future of TV, because then you got people like my wife and one of my best friends who never watches broadcast television. Never. She watches everything on demand, everything, with the possible exception of sports. And that's the real interesting thing here. Sports is the one thing people want to watch live, sports and news. So and so you got ESPN, but their viewership's dropping and they still want the same amount of money, and Charter doesn't want to pay them. And my point is here, you give this 10 to 20 years, and basically the business model for cable television is going to fall apart. And a lot of, I'm not the only person saying this. A lot of people in this business, they're saying the same thing, that, and this is the very start of it. We're on the precipice of the downhill slide, and it might take 10 years, it might take 20 years, but yeah, there's a possibility. And what station was I talking about? Oh, it was ESPN. ESPN is now thinking about starting what's called an OTT broadcast service. That's over the top. That would be like a Roku channel where you pay just to watch ESPN or the ESPN family of channels, and you would pay them directly, like, $6 a month or whatever the hell they want. Now, your life can very quickly be being eaten up by $6 charges, and that's true. But that that's probably the future. You will have, like Discovery Communications. There's the History Channel. There's Discovery. There's the Travel Channel. Blah 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 blah. You would buy the whole suite of them, and you would pay Discovery directly, like $4 a month to watch, and that would be in lieu of actually putting them in a cable package. So anyway, it's going to be interesting to see what happens here. But there's a whole bunch of people all across the country now who have charter cable, and that's nationwide. Who right now can't watch ABC, can't watch Disney Plus, can't watch ESPN, and a couple other things too, because the Disney Corporation owns all those channels, and like I said, Charter Communications told them to go f off. So it's going to be really interesting to see what happens. And on top of that, like I said, you're dealing with this strike too, where there's no real scripted production coming out of anywhere, because no one's crossed a picket line. So it's going to be it's going to be interesting how long that lasts too. Anyway, I want to thank you folks for watching. Tomorrow we don't have a guest booked, so I'm going to encourage you to call tomorrow. We'll do the usual thing, little roundup of the news, little roundup of the UFO stuff. Actually, I have a whole bunch of stuff. I basically already have tomorrow's show planned out, because I knew the thing with Chris was going to run long, because I had a zillion questions and it was just really cool, and it did, and I'm not apologizing. So, I gotta admit, I find this amazing. And you guys can, first of all, if when we're not broadcasting live, you can watch the archives of these shows on all 8 of our platforms. The list is on jimandknight.com. And also you can leave a message, a voicemail, or a text for me at the number on the screen, 408. And let me see, it's like that's right here. Yeah, right there. 408-458-5088. It's the coolest telephone number on the planet. We got it by chance. We got assigned it by chance. I'm thrilled. Anyway, yeah, leave me a text message, leave me a voicemail. I don't check these during the show, and I want to point out the one night last month where we had like 2,500 people watching, and people were saying, "How come you're not checking the chat?" And I know it's common on these types of shows for people to respond to people in the show chat, and I'm going to tell you, I'm not going to do it. You want to talk to me? Call up. Got that? This is a new paradigm we're trying to start here. So give me a call. You go to jimandknight.com/call right here. It's simple as pie, and I'll put you on the air. And hopefully, maybe you can call in tomorrow. I think you should plan on it. Well, and thank you for watching tonight. This was fun. I enjoy this. I hope you did too. And I'll see you tomorrow. Take care.